Okay, everyone, it's 6 o'clock. Are we ready to commence? Just check with Wendy. Okay, yes, we're live. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Council briefing of the 11th of August 2020. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We have all members accounted for this evening and Councillor Loden joining us via Zoom. So I'll go straight to public question time and receiving of public statements. Would you like to make a statement this evening, Bern? Thanks for being here. Manager, have we received any comments in writing?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, we didn't receive any comments in writing.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll go to declarations of interest, CEO.
Through you, Mayor Cole, no declarations received for today's meeting.
Okay, then we'll go straight to business. Item 5.1, number 173 Oxford Street, Leederville, change of use from restaurant, cafe and single house to small bar and single house. Any questions? Go, Councillor Wallace.
Sorry. The noise management plan stated that there was a sound system. It was just confined to the internal space, but the acoustic model included some outdoor speakers. Are we definite that there's going to be speakers outside playing amplified music?
Through you, Mayor Cole. So the acoustic report's been modelled on there being sound pumped through 2 speakers internally and 2 speakers outside as well. No amplified music though, or no live music. So just regular music through speakers.
Does there need to be a change to the noise management plan that says something different then? I thought there was a couple of comments in there that said like music will be strictly inside.
Through you, Mayor Cole. I think what they're indicating is that they wouldn't be performing any music outside, but the acoustic report has been modelled so that they are able to have 2 speakers outside and 2 inside, and the outcome of the acoustic report, which recommends a construction of a noise wall, is on that basis of there being 2 speakers outside. So that can accommodate what the maximum that they might be intending to do.
Councillors. Acting Manager, I just wanted to request a amendment for next week, and it's just in relation to Sunday hours where it's where there is a public holiday following. If that could be amended to 12 a.m. where the Sunday is followed by a public holiday. I did discuss that with the applicant at the meeting that we had with you and the applicant and council members that were in attendance, and the applicant welcomed that amendment. And I think that just indicates our policy does need a bit of an update when we get to that one. Any other questions? Councillor Wallace.
Sorry, through you, Michael. Just around the sale of alcohol, is there any time restrictions on it? If the cafe is going to be open from early in the morning, we'd be able to buy alcohol at that time?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that becomes a liquor licensing management issue, and they can limit the hours of which alcohol can be sold, or they can issue unlimited license.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Loden. It's 2020 to 25. Any questions on this item? Okay. Look, I did flag some questions via email. It was in relation to, there's been consideration of our town centre boundaries and how large an area that can be. I'm thinking particularly of Leederville, given that we were meeting at a proposed small bar that is beyond Luna but still falls within the Leederville town centre. You can imagine that there could be a fair walk involved if you did want to have a cigarette. And just consideration around whether people would have to walk so far out that it might not be well lit and outside of the view of CCTV, and whether in consideration of the City of Perth's approach, which was to look at the malls, that we may be better off looking at high pedestrian areas rather than whole areas of town centre. So for example, the town centre in Mount Hawthorn runs from Oxford Street and Anzac Road all the way through to the Boulevard and Scarborough Beach Road. So if you're in the middle there, it could be a long walk to have a cigarette. So just those considerations. I was also interested to ask why there's a target just on this one item and why the other priority areas haven't had targets assigned to them.
Through you, Mayor Cole, thank you for your questions. Yes, there will be consultation with the town teams and the community. So just to be clear that this is a strategic high-level target which enables a piece of work to occur. And that probably leads to the second question with consideration around town centre boundaries. So once a decision is made about this target, that gives us the go-ahead to pretty much scope each of our town centres and look at where it is appropriate to have a boundary for a smoke-free area, and also where, if we do decide to have safe smoking areas, where they could be with consideration to where the licensed premises are. In terms of question 3 regarding the City of Perth approach, yes, they have banned they do have smoke-free areas in Murray Street Mall, Hay Street Mall and Forest Chase. We've got a few other examples of where other local governments have implemented smoke-free areas, and from my knowledge, we're the 6th local government to consider this in Western Australia. And other local governments have considered smoke-free for other environments as well. So we have some really useful information as to see how it's been implemented in other places and how that could work within Vincent, and to have that specific approach to each of our town centres. In terms of the last question, why is there just one target for this item? So within the public health plan, we have the five pillars. This target is listed under public health leadership. We decided on one target because we felt that tobacco, the evidence is very clear around the public health impacts of tobacco. We also have some clear evidence to suggest that public sentiment supports smoke-free environments. It's a bit more challenging to set targets around things like healthy food behaviours, physical activity and alcohol at this stage, and there is work within the plan to manage those particular areas. So in terms of why it sits under public health leadership, we felt that if we are going to commit to being public health leaders, then one of the things that we can do to demonstrate that is to set a target and to really put an aspiration out there for what we could achieve at the City of Vincent. My view is that target ticks the boxes for all of the other pillars within the public health plan, including natural environment, built environment, social environment, and health protection. So it encompasses all of the strategic pillars.
So I'm just trying to find it in the policy. What is the exact wording of the target? I'm just scanning through the document and the report, and for some reason I know it's in here quite clearly, but I cannot find it.
Through you, Mayor Cole, page 19.
19.
Smoke-free town centres by 2025.
I'll just probably flag that I might potentially, have a think about this, but I may move an amendment to suggest smoke-free areas within town centres. I think because we're going to be advertising this, and if we're the intent is to not go for the whole town centre area, and we do think there are practical implications of that, anyway, I'm not asking questions, so I'll stop. So I'm just flagging that, so I'll have a think about that. I also just wanted to ask a question, and I thought it would potentially be align with strategic objectives to include an action around encouraging women and girls' participation in sport and encourage local clubs to grow female membership.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. What you're discussing there fits in with our social environment pillar. So I'm just having a look at which particular one that would apply to the most. There is something on social inclusion. So we can certainly look at the wording of probably item 6.2, which is about social inclusion. We do mention priority population groups, but certainly women in sport can be looked at as part of that.
Thank you. And the other one I might have missed, I did see one on seniors, which was about around falls, which is very important, but I also wondered whether there was one that sort of dealt with that more around active seniors and connected seniors.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that can certainly be considered. The reason why there is one in there that's specific around seniors and falls is because we have some health data to suggest that we have a higher falls rate in the City of Vincent. So that's why there is that specific deliverable.
Yep, no, I think that's excellent. I just thought potentially if you consider Loftus Community Centre and the work there, that might be an action that we could follow through on through the public health plan. Are there any questions, council members? Councillor Fotakis?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Through you, I just want to just follow up on the information regarding other local governments that have implemented smoke-free town centres. So would appreciate some information on those if we could. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. The Australian Council of Smoking and Health have provided us with a bit of a list of other local governments that have implemented smoke-free. I'll just briefly talk about Western Australia first. So the City of Perth implemented their smoke-free arrangements in 2013. The City of Bunbury has banned smoking on their Coombana Bay foreshore. The town of Cottesloe has got smoke-free on their beaches and foreshore reserves in certain places. The City of Albany has a smoke-free outdoors policy, and the Shire of Augusta Margaret River has a smoke-free zone along the main street in Margaret River. Interestingly, I've got some data on some of the consultation and generally the support for these proposals, 80% or higher for those who have kept data for that.
Councillor Toppelberg?
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just further question on the smoke-free. What are the implications in terms of penalties that's proposed? So someone is smoking in a smoke-free area. Is it covered under a local law? How is it actually implemented and enforced?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. At this stage, we're still examining how exactly that would work. My view is that we would have a strong encouragement approach, which would form the backbone of how that policy is implemented. Some other local governments have legitimated it through a local law. Some have done it through a policy. So with a local law, there is the capacity to infringe. I can't answer on the penalties right now, but just to say that there is that option.
Okay, and I get just on that, in terms of for an activity that's not illegal, not allowing it in a certain place, and I'd be interested to know what powers would be available to it, like the niceties of it. But I know there's been incidents of people smoking on Cottesloe Beach and being told not to, and them just shrugging their shoulders and continuing to do so. Anecdotally, and those sorts of things are reported. I'd be interested to know how we intend to not just have it as an aspiration and something nice, but actually implementing it, and particularly working together with licensed venues and certainly the late night trade that generally, that would be interesting to know prior to enshrining it as an aspiration.
Sure. Through you, Mayor Cole, that's a great question. I think that as I was indicating before, the main crux of this particular target is to look at that human behaviour component and to sort of try and drive that cultural aspect within our town centres and through the businesses and through our pedestrian users as well. So that's really the main part of it. In terms of the ability to issue infringements, we know from the implementation of regulation at a local level that we have those people in the community sometimes, which I call a deliberate non-complier, and sometimes the implementation of infringements is the only way to actually bring that message across. So I think that as we scope this piece of work, assuming that it gets supported, as we scope this piece of work, that's one thing we would look at, that human behaviour aspect, that cultural aspect with our local businesses in particular, and sort of having that partnership style approach to managing the policy.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole. Just, sorry, continuing on with the smoking query. Currently, in our piazzas and squares, do we have any policy on non-smoking? Are they areas that when they are in use that we have it banned?
Through you, Mayor Cole, all that I'm aware of is that when we issue outdoor eating area permits, we have no smoking within those. So that's pretty much all that I'm aware of within the city at the moment.
Deputy Mayor, would you mind stepping in for a moment?
Sorry?
Would you mind
Oh,
stepping
yes,
into
of
the chair?
course.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, I saw that Councillor Loden did have his hand on the electronic Zoom.
Go for it, Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. On that same topic of smoke-free zones, did the city give any consideration to creating the town centres as a smoke-free zone, but then defining specific smoking areas in there at all? And is that an option for the city to consider?
For those who perhaps didn't hear, the question was, has the city considered having smoke-free town centres, but creating smoking areas within those smoke-free town centres?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, we can consider that. It's certainly been implemented in other local governments, so it is something for us to consider.
Will that be part of the broad consideration as part of this overall piece of work prior to it coming back to council again? Or do we need to specify something in that for consideration? Or is that just part of what would be done in the lead up to this change occurring, assuming this is successfully supported?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, what my thoughts are is that if we're able to get the high level strategic aspect of this target refined and sorted out through this public health plan approval process, it is, even though it is called a public health plan, within our strategic framework, we consider it to be a strategy. So it provides it enables us to do that specific piece of work to really look at a lot of these specifics that we're talking about. So I would foresee that we would be coming back to council looking at the specifics of the smoke-free target and how that would apply. If we're able to get agreement on a target first, then that helps us to really identify some of the considerations like what's just being discussed now, and really being able to provide that advice back to council.
Anything further, Councillor Loden? You're good. Anything further, Councillor Castle?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, not to dwell on this even more, but and happy for this to be taken on notice. I'm just wondering if we can have some notes or commentary on how this might apply in relation to alfresco use on our footpaths by our food and beverage outlets.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, my understanding is that they're already issued permits for alfresco dining, and part of the permit is to be smoke-free. So we are already partially smoke-free.
Councillor Wallace?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. Does smoke-free include vaping?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, yes, it does. So that is in the Tobacco Products Control Act, it actually encompasses vaping. There was a case that's being tested in the courts, so that is the case.
Anything further? No. Okay. We'll move on to item 5.3, the minor strategic review 2020 of the Strategic Community Plan 2018 to 2028. Any questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Mayor. And I understand the construct of the minor review and it's the question to the CEO. And I've had a look through the review and I understand that the proposed changes are minor, but the justification for not having had any contact with community, or it should also probably be said council up until this point, is that because the changes are minor, therefore we didn't need to consult or otherwise. But if we look at the detail section, it says the current SCP states the 2-year desktop review to help us track our progress on how well we've delivered on our commitments. I'm just, I guess, asking for the rationale. Has there been any engagement other than the collation of the general feedback that we get along the way of conducting our business? But the decision not to have any engagement beyond administration in terms of the review up until this point, is that, there's nothing that jumps out at, but just ask my question, don't I? Yes. So, are we satisfied that is appropriate, considering that it's another 2 years down the track before community or council has opportunity to make any comment or change? And with that in mind, are we comfortable to adopt the modifications rather than just test it and send it out to the community and ask the question?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, part of the rationale to not conduct community consultation on this minor review was that council did go through a nearly 2-year consultation exercise in the creation and development of the Strategic Community Plan, which is a 10-year document, and there were no proposed changes to the substance of that plan, and they're largely of an administrative or technical nature, the amendments. So we don't think there's any substantive change to the document as created through that 2-year consultation process initially with council.
Anything further? Councillors? Councillor Loden, you're all good? Okay, thank you. Nothing from me. Item 5.4, the extension of temporary change of use planning exemptions.
Sorry, just to note, Madam Deputy Mayor, that I actually will declare a proximity interest in this matter, in that somebody who's a closely associated person has availed themselves of those provisions, namely at a property that is on Fitzgerald Street, and the implications of this would have a direct impact upon their ability to continue to avail themselves of that exemption. So I'll depart the chamber.
Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Hallett?
It's specified 3 months. Is there a reason for that as opposed to the ending of the declaration of from the state government?
Through you, Mayor. It's 3 months after the end of the state of emergency. That does align to some of the exemptions set out by the Minister in their notice. And also it aligns to Council's original decision where it was 15th of September or that specified date. So we've just simply removed the 15th of September.
Councillors, any further questions? I just wanted to absolutely check that by using the word current, if the current state of emergency is extended, is it still the current state of emergency? Just to be absolutely sure in our terminology.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's a very good question. Perhaps to avoid any doubt, that could be revisited and removed from the recommendation.
Or like current or extended or something like that, potentially. Okay, thank you. All right, back to it. Sorry, Docs on Tap is recharging. Thank you. So we're moving on. Thank you, CEO. Moving on to infrastructure and environment matters. So 6.1, update on homelessness support. Any questions on this item? I did have a question in relation to the discussions that have been happening with Manor Inc. I believe that Tranby House, and it is discussed in the report, is going to move to more of an outreach model rather than having operating as a day centre. So on that basis, I was going to inquire as to whether there's been any discussion with Manor Inc. on potentially moving to the Moore Street precinct, given that that's up and running.
Through Nicole, I'm not aware of any specific discussions along that lines. My understanding is Tranby House is about to undertake the renovations to the building, or Tranby uniting WA to Tranby House, and that includes a kitchen upgrade. So I think discussions are still ongoing about whether Manor Inc. operate out of that facility. That's my understanding.
Yes, I think that things might have moved on from there. Perhaps we could discuss this during the week. I think that Tranby House, given that it's outreach, it's not going to have the volume of people coming through the door. So the meal service would no longer be servicing a volume of people. We probably just need to confirm that. I did discuss that with the CEO of Uniting WA. So I think we might need to progress discussions about Moore Street, which was part of the original discussion when council members met with Manor Inc. and staff, that there were two options on the table.
Okay. Yes. Okay, Michael. We'll do that this week before we go to council. That what you just said is at odds that my last discussion with United WA. It was still being explored, but we'll sort that out this week and put something
Okay.
in the
Yeah,
report.
we should probably just seek confirmation from Uniting WA about whether the Manor Inc. meal service of that magnitude would work with the proposed outreach model that they're working towards. And also just in terms of rough sleeper counts, I think that data is very valuable. Obviously, people are seeing an increase on the streets, and I wondered if we could actually get some historic data from the rough sleeper counts.
Yes, Michael will provide that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Next item is tender RFT IE 69-2020 bulk waste green verge collections appointment of successful tenderer. Councillor Loden.
I have a couple of questions that are probably confidential, as I'm sure the director will be very excited to hear. So I was wondering if we could I could ask those at the end, if possible.
Of course. Yep. Sure. Are there any questions on the non-confidential report? Okay. We will come back to that. 6.3 Waste Strategy Project 8 Commercial Waste Collections Update. That item has been withdrawn. 6.4 Department of Transport Long-Term Cycle Network Consultation Responses. Any questions? Councillor Gontaszewski.
Just wondering if it's possible to include the Department of Transport objectives for the long-term cycle network in the report, or draw my attention to where they are if I've missed it. I note that the overarching aim of the cycle network is the cycling of all ages and ability. However, in a briefing with Department of Transport, they indicated the objectives around schools and cycling on major routes and town centres. And I think that may be useful to have included in the public document. I'm wondering if it's possible to get those included in the report.
Yep, through Michael, that's easy enough. We'll add them before the reports are finalised this week.
Councillors. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Just wondering if you can confirm, given that we will be reviewing our bike network plan post this, what will be the avenues in which we can then provide feedback throughout this period for iterative changes to the Department of Transport's plan?
Yeah, through my call. So we are due to review our bike plan next financial year. And in fact, we've applied for funding to the DOT to assist us in doing that, 50% funding. The DOT see our review of the bike plan is quite a critical part of their LTCN process. So when we review and we want to give feedback, they'll see that as the appropriate time to give feedback and consider changes to the long-term cycle network at that time.
And do we have a sense of what, I guess, characteristics of changes they're going to be interested in listening to versus ignoring? Like, what are the parameters around that feedback that we can give?
I think in the high level answer would be they look for strategic routes. So they're very happy for us to do local things that we think are important, but their focus is on a strategic network that covers 33 local governments. So they look at it from a very strategic perspective, you know, people traveling through more than one local authority and how they do that so that the strategic network matches.
Hang on a minute. Have you finished, Councillor Hallett, or are you mid-question? You're rethinking. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. So when the Department of Transport is creating or seeking a route, and I think that the presentation that they made, they essentially said they did whatever they wanted to do and then realised that there's no point in doing that because most of the roads they're talking about belong to local government, so they better go out and talk to them. That's paraphrasing, so when let's use the example of the route that's now proposed to not go through Hyde Park. So to come down Norfolk, go Raglan, Ethel, Throstle, and then back down that way. When that route is proposed, is that sort of conversation a two-way conversation? Do they say, what about this? And we respond? Do they walk it, ride it, or drive it? Or do they rely on us entirely for that? Like the route, and I know it's a strategic plan across a massive area, but when these things are lines on a map, whose responsibility is it to actually ensure I know our responsibility in our decision making, but whose responsibility is it to ensure that that is actually the best route in terms of traffic topography? Because what things look like on a map and what things look like on the ground can be different. Do we provide feedback? Are we consulted at that point, or do we actually suggest those things, or do they just say, here's where the lines are on the map, and unless we kick up a fuss like we did with Hyde Park, it's essentially an aspirational plan on a map, and we is the question clearer? It is to me, sort of.
See you, Michael. I'll do my best. It's definitely a two-way process. They're very open to discussing options. I mean, we found that not a difficult thing to do with them. I think when we propose changes, they will expect us to support that change, you know, with strong reasons why we want to make the change. So I think the onus is upon the city to support the reasons for the changes. But so far they've been you can see from the consultation, they've made changes and it's not been difficult. So they're very open to those suggestions.
Sorry, I did have one further question, just in relation to schools in particular, throughout the network, which is the Perth and Peel. Is that the with new schools and otherwise? But is the accessibility, given that the intent is to broaden the cyclability of the network and of the state and the metropolitan area, the links to schools and the specifically addressed within the plan, or are they ancillary and this is the best route to get commuters from point A to point B, and it happens to be nearby to a school, so we might be able to link it back in this way?
Through Mayor Cole, I think when they were designing the plan, the approach was to make sure that all schools within the Perth and Peel region had at least a local route outside of the school, connecting the school, but I don't think they've looked at the specifics of how a route, the catchment area within the routes within that catchment area would work. So it's more making sure that the school is situated on a cycle route.
Are we coming back to you, Councillor Hallett? No? Any more questions on the bike plan? Yes, Councillor Gonchevsky.
I think this probably is going to be answered partially by the objectives of Department of Transport, which I think is around the cycling infrastructure on major corridors. But just if there's any comment in relation to discussions or consideration around the provision of secondary and local cycling infrastructure along major thoroughfares, Walcott Street, some of the, I'm going to have to go to the map, and some of the more, I guess, the local distributor roads within the network that carry a reasonable traffic volume.
Chairman Cole will take that question on notice and add some information in the briefing notes.
Councillors, Councillor Fotakis.
Through you, Mayor, this is probably something that the CEO can assist with. Earlier I mentioned the possibility of taking to Central Zone and through to State Council of Welga to look at the apportioning of funding to local government on the primary routes. Would this be best addressed as a separate motion through to council or as an amendment on the current item?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can liaise with Councillor Fotakis between now and the council meeting next week about whether or not how we would support some advocacy through Walga on greater state government funding for bike infrastructure.
I'm just thinking, just brought it back to my question as to whether to bring it through council, to City of Vincent Council, obviously to take it further. There is a preference for any of those sort of items to be endorsed by council. So I'm just trying to get some clarity to achieve something by next week's meeting.
So your question is, should it be via amendment to this item or by a notice of motion? Any governance advice on the preferred method for that?
Through you, Mayor Cole, if the proposal was around advocacy with Walga in the Central Zone to state government on funding, given that this report relates directly to the Department of Transport's long-term cycle network, I think we could easily accommodate an amendment to this report around that, depending on council's view on how strong we should be advocating for that.
Well, then through you, Mayor, I'll flag an amendment and obviously circulate through to my councillor colleagues in the lead up to next week's meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. Are there any further questions on the bike plan? Okay, thank you. That takes us to community and business services items. 7.1 investment report as at the 30th of June 2020. 7.2 authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st to 30th of June 2020. Okay. 7.3 provisional financial statements as at 30th of June 2020. Okay, I'll ask a question. Just with the provisional closing position of 2.963 million, as opposed to the budget forecast of 6,608. Is that accounted for in the 2021 carry forwards in its entirety?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I think, or to you, Mayor Cole. I'll double check that against the open. I think we currently have an opening surplus in our budget for the 2019-20 year. And I'll just confirm the figure of that. But yes, you can consider that it is there in its entirety. But it is subject to change still. It's provisional and we still do have a number of budgetary amendments coming through. But I suppose in summary, we probably are $2 million better off than we were expecting to be at the end of the financial year is probably the easiest way to look at it.
Okay, so there'll be further info in the briefing notes?
Yes, that's right. I'll
Okay.
confirm those figures for you.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Moving to Chief Executive Officer items, 8.1, update on the implementation of the Sustainable Environment Strategy 2019 to 24. Councillor Hallett and then Councillor Wallace.
Just wondering if it's possible in the briefing notes or by email to have a look at some maps of the greening program in terms of what's being delivered through this in terms of location specifically. And similarly with the Adopt a Verge program, if it's possible to see the extent of that expansion that has been progressed through this financial year.
Through Nicole, could I clarify? Are we looking for maps that show where intended works are this financial year, as opposed to works that were carried out in previous years? Just to clarify that.
Ones that have been achieved in related to this report, and then next year would be great too.
Okay, so Nicole, we can certainly work on that. I couldn't guarantee we'll have it by the end of the week, because there's quite a lot of work. Obviously, there's so many different sites we've worked on, but it can be done.
Okay, I'm not really wanting you to do lots of additional work, so perhaps we'll just have a chat about that later.
Councillor Wallace.
Through you, Nicole. I might be wrong, but I thought there was a implementation plan that got passed at the same time as the strategy. I was just wondering why the update on the implementation of the strategy was provided with respect to the strategy and not with respect to the implementation plan. Anyone?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the report on the progress is on those key actions, which they are combined. It's one and the same.
Is there a update to the implementation plan coming up, or like a review? Or I just found the update pretty qualitative rather than kind of.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of some of the metrics on, say, for instance, CO2 levels and.
Yeah, just, I mean, kind of like setting out timeframes for the delivery of items, costs for the delivery of items. I don't know, just like the plan, do, check. I don't find particularly informative for kind of tracking where we are in the delivery of some of these things. I thought the implementation strategy was, or plan was quite good, and like kind of like an update to that would have been helpful.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can provide further metrics in the next progress report and try to bring that back on more like on a quarterly basis. Some of them track year to year, and I think we're still slightly less than 12 months into the implementation plan.
Okay, look, I had questions along a similar vein, and I wasn't sure whether we could measure all of these things. So, for example, we talk about how we've reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and I'm not sure if we can actually measure that, how we would do that. So some of these things I don't know if it's possible, but water reductions, it talks about how we've exceeded our kilometres of greenway, but it doesn't sort of say how much, and you know, how many metres squared of turf have we replaced. So I do think metrics would be great, and perhaps we could have a bit more of a discussion about the plan, do, check, act model and its application. Are there any other questions? Councillor Wallace.
Through you, Mayor Cole. I think we've got the Net Zero 2030 plan, and included in that was emissions from transport. I was just wondering if we're currently considering emissions from the construction of our road network. Like, I think the manufacture and laying of hot mix asphalt is particularly carbon intensive, and I can't see that it's been addressed in our strategy yet.
Through you, Mayor Cole, Councillor Loden may have a comment on that, but we did not, I don't think we have a calculation on those embedded emissions, so we don't have a baseline for what it currently is. So there'd need to be some further modelling on that to establish a baseline for us to be able to then respond to from that.
Can I ask Councillor Wallace a question? Councillor Wallace, it's just interesting. No, that's interesting because you're in the hot seat. I did have correspondence with a resident who was concerned about the emissions from the machinery and that they weren't being captured. And there was discussion with one of our staff members about the capability of the actual asphalt laying vehicle and what sort of standard it met. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about? Are you talking about the actual process of producing asphalt?
More the process. I think like our vehicle-based emissions are captured pretty well in the plan, but it was the kind of manufacture of the asphalt, which is kind of like a hydrocarbon-derived product, didn't seem to be captured at all. And, you know, like our road network is maybe one of our largest pieces of infrastructure that we own. So some kind of life cycle analysis of the carbon embodied by that road network, I think would be very important if we want to figure that out soon, if we wanted to hit net zero by 2030 and include that.
Thank you for the clarification.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I do recall being in a meeting with Councillor Loden having a discussion on some of the embedded emissions, but I don't recall the detail of that. But I remember Councillor Loden grilling us intensively about it.
Councillor Loden, your time to jump in.
Thank you, Mo. Yeah, so I guess we did discuss this and there was an amendment put up to include accounting of our Scope 3 emissions as part of the previous iteration of the Sustainable Environment Strategy. The concern at the time was the ability to calculate it and then report it accurately. There was an addition made in there to do some work on that, but I'm not sure on the status of it. But it is a complicated issue, but also I guess probably the year-end objective is to have it somehow considered in the contract award process as well, which is another one for the Director of Infrastructure and Environment that he'll have to deal with in the future, I suspect. And through that mechanism, you can actually drive an improvement and look at alternative ways to require the reporting of those emissions, and B, to then look at how you could reduce those emissions as well. I don't know if that helps.
It does. It all came flooding back. The Scope 3 emissions, yes. Could we have an update as on the because I think it was to explore how that could be done, because there was interest, but as you said, it was about if we wanted to do this in the future, what would we have to do to make that happen?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can provide some further background in the briefing notes.
Thank you, CEO. Any further questions? Okay. Next item is 8.2, amendments to new lease to HISP Proprietary Limited, Beatty Park Cafe. We all know where it is, so don't need to read out the address. Questions? Councillor Gontaszewski.
Just two questions in relation to the rent-free period. How, I guess, certain are we that the works are going to take place in late 2020? And if they were delayed at all, is clause 2.3 considered to be sufficient, or is the agreement, given that clause 2.3 is just about noting that that this agreement would be sufficient to address any extension to the works, or if the start was delayed, or I guess any future works that may be conducted that may impact on the trade of the cafe. And I guess the second part of the question is just that in terms of other if there is any other lease arrangements that the city has where we lease to commercial entities and then undertake works on the premises that the commercial entity operates from, if we usually do offer some sort of rent abatement during that period, and what the mechanism is for that to occur. I'm not aware I've seen anything since being on council.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in respect to the second question about offering rent abatement, I don't think that's come up while I've been here either. So I'll just double check and we'll provide details if it has. But the lease, if it's a lease under the Commercial Tenancies Retail Shops Act, we are required to provide relief. So that's why in the case with the Beatty Park Physio lease, the Beatty Park Cafe lease with HISP, we're proposing to grant them 5 months and 1 week relief, and that wouldn't relate to exactly when the work starts. So when we initially got their proposal for leasing that building, they requested a rent-free period to allow for the setup, and then we've recently negotiated to delay the commencement, obviously due to COVID, and then we're looking at providing further rent relief to align with the indoor pool works. And the proposal would be that we're just providing the 5 months, 1 week in total. So even if that work was delayed slightly, we wouldn't be providing further relief. And we believe that aligns with the commercial tenancies requirements.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Council members, I just wanted to, I think it's probably not 100% clear, but is this the sort of saying that if there is protracted works, that this is the extent of the discount that would be provided and that there would be nothing further?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's proposed. But I imagine if it resulted in a year's work instead of the 4 to 5 months, then we would need to revisit that, because we do have to provide them relief based on the disruption to their operations.
Okay. So, I'm just trying to think. The other thought was whether it would be more appropriate for council to just give this same period but wait for the business case to come to council on the Beatty Park's work, so that we could actually be a bit more sure about the time frame.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we've discussed these options with HISP, the proposed cafe operator, and they're looking for some certainty. So this proposal means that they get a certain 5 month, 1 week period of rent abatement, and that's appropriate to them, and that seems to be in the city's interest, because that does provide us certainty as well, and sort of covers their 3 month rent-free period at the commencement as well.
Okay. Councillor Fotakis.
Just on that point, through you, Mayor, I mean, is clarity on what the Mayor's talking about with possible further disruption, is that best handled as a further clarification on the recommendation before us? Is that something that could be done?
Through you, Mayor Cole, could I just clarify, are you saying an additional point to note that if there's further disruption, so greater than the 4 or 5 months proposed, that additional relief may be considered?
Correct.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we could include a recommendation to that effect, but at the moment we've discussed with HISP that as a result of that indoor pool works, like 5 months, 1 week in the entirety would be appropriate, and they're agreeable to that. So I think that's in the city's interest, but we could consider other options.
Can I flag that a possible amendment? I'll have a further consideration on that one, please.
Council members, Councillor Smith.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Is there a calculation that is used for this rent relief under this Commercial Tenancies Act?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I have to take that on notice and double check how it's usually calculated.
Councillors. Okay. Thank you, Manager. Moving to item 8.3, extension of term of COVID-19 Relief and Recovery Committee. Questions? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Question to the CEO.
I'll put something more concrete together before next week. But given the potential argument that COVID is the new normal in Western Australia, at least, I'd be very interested to know your views on why those delegations and the decision-making powers are required or in the best interests of the City of Vincent at large to be delegated to a committee. The existence of a forum for discussion of issues that specifically relate to or provide specific advice or forum for the relief and recovery strategy is not questioned, but the actual decision-making role, I'm struggling to find, other than even the allocation of funds from Leadable Gardens or I presume being a decision-making body based on the advice provided by the Arts Advisory Group in relation to the arts funding, why that needs to be removed from the council process at this point.
Through you, Mayor Cole, as outlined in the attached evaluation, it's certainly our view that the strategy and committee structure with weekly meetings was very useful when there was a high frequency of decisions and a lot of changing information, changing regulations that the city had to respond to. It's certainly the case that the meeting agendas now are of a less urgent type, and our default position would be, unless there was some urgency around an item, it would come to full council for consideration. Our proposal to extend the committee's terms of reference for a further 3 months is predicated on the committee moving from weekly to monthly meetings, and those monthly meetings would essentially provide a forum for us to track progress against the strategy, and we're moving from the short or urgent relief and response actions now to medium and long-term actions around the proposed Vincent rebound plan. And if we could, I don't think it's necessary to amend the terms of reference for the committee because it's been operating well, but it would be our default position that unless there was some urgency within that 2-week period that we couldn't make a monthly council meeting for an important decision, we would be using the monthly committee meetings for the updates on the overall implementation of the strategy, as opposed to that fast, frequent weekly meeting cycle that we had commenced at the end of March and early April.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess, I mean, that's the construct and nature of the meetings, but it's the decision-making power that I'm specifically referring to. So the awarding of tenders over 250,000, the decisions to dispose of property, to grant licenses on permanent structures, to determine development applications that aren't under delegation, or to make the arts funding and also the Leadable Gardens money, leaving those two aside, the money, are there any of those decisions that justifiably shouldn't come to council, given that we have the provisions to be able to hold a special council meeting if any of them are deemed to be urgent?
It's just reflecting that there's many of those things that we certainly haven't done.
That's
it's yeah.
No, I understand the principle. Go ahead.
I'm asking it as a question. I'll talk more to it next week, but it's the existence of a forum for the discussion and dealing with the issues and managing how the city is specifically responding to COVID and some of those specific issues within the community and within council administration is not subject to the question. It's about the decision-making power and whether it's required and whether that is as open as the meetings are, whether that is the right message to the community about the urgency of COVID-related decision-making.
Question coming?
That is the question.
That is the question. Okay. That's a very good question.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we could clarify in the report that the administration's position that unless there was some urgency, and by urgency, that would probably mean to us that there was some change to the public health situation where, for instance, there might be a widespread outbreak in the city of Vincent, that we would have to take some urgent decisions, that in the absence of some urgency, our default position would be to take the financial or the larger the items with larger implications around city finances and budget to full council meetings, and for the monthly meetings of the COVID committee to deal with the medium and long-term recovery efforts directly related to the strategy that council's endorsed.
Vern, I really just have to say it's wonderful to have you here, but I'm so distracted by the pen clicking. I've been trying to not let it get into my brain, but I've succumbed. Sorry, Vern, we really do love having you here. Thank you for being here. Sorry, where were we? Were you still speaking?
No, through you, Michael, I think we can amend the report to provide some further clarification about the nature and type of issues that we'll be taking to the committee to monthly meetings going forward for the next 3 months. We don't think it would be necessary to amend the terms of reference at this stage because the committee's existence and its success over the last 3 to 4 months does provide some safety net for our governance and decision-making ability in case the public health situation changes dramatically and in an unforeseen way.
Yep, go ahead.
Given the powers that with the changes to the Local Government Act and the fact that the committee is now established and the terms of reference are there, in the event that council was to disband the committee, could it not be reinstated with the existing terms of reference within 24 hours by virtue of a special council meeting, if that was a view that council took, if the public health situation changed?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, council could reappoint that committee. There would be some process around calling of that special council meeting and publishing the agenda, but that would just be an administrative issue.
Councillor Hallett.
I was just going to ask, what's the timeline for putting out notice for a special council meeting before it can be held?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think the guidance is as much notice as possible. So we would, I'm getting some nods from my colleagues, but we would nearly certainly try to provide 3 or 4 days notice to make sure the members of the public were aware of it, unless urgency required.
Councillors? Okay. Thank you. Next item is 8.4, amendment to council delegations, delegation to issue a heritage conservation notice. Any questions? I just did have to I think this is for the, probably for the Acting Director of Development Services. I assume this means that we haven't been issuing these notices because I can't recall one coming to council in the last 7 years.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that would be correct. Ultimately, the head of power is through the planning regs, took effect in 2015. So in that time, there have been no notices of this type that have been issued.
But obviously there's now a need to act in some circumstances.
Yes, Mayor Cole, ultimately it's a provision that has been in existence, so it's not an additional power as such, it's just the ability to exercise that administratively and when the need arises. So ultimately that would just provide more efficient and effective, I guess, ability for administration to deal with these types of matters. So quite ordinarily, if there was an issue, administration would work with landowners to, I suppose, get heritage properties up to standard. But if it's necessary to issue a notice, then at least it's available to us.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Hallett and then Councillor Wallace.
I guess how long has administration been aware of these few properties, and is it recent and so we're only now wanting to use this power, or is there a reason why the request hasn't come to council to do it under our authority?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'd say there have been more recent examples where it would circumstances would benefit from having this ability to issue the notice. But ultimately, as I mentioned before, we ordinarily, administration would work with the landowners to resolve these issues without issuing the notice. So Again, there are some examples in the background where it would benefit from being able to issue this, but it's not a response to a particular example.
Councillor Wallace, did you have a question?
Thanks, through you, Michael. Just quickly, is this another kind of complaints-driven process that we issue these notices on, or do we have officers out there inspecting these properties regularly?
Through Mayor Cole, it's the former. We'll operate on a complaints basis.
Any further questions? Councillor Hallett?
How many properties do we have on the heritage list?
Through Mayor Cole, after take that on notice and confirm with you.
Any further questions? Okay. All right. So moving on to item 8.4. Amendment to council. Oh, hang on. Oh, I've got two 8.4s on my sheet. I'm like, what am I? One is an absolute majority decision and one was not. So I think that must be an old agenda page. I'll cross that off. Right. 8.5, proposed governance framework. Any questions on this item? I did have a few. I just wanted to pick up on something that Councillor Smith has raised, and I don't have the agenda paper number, but it's page 21 of the document, and it was talking about items that will be covered in reports to council. Councillor Smith has recently raised that we should discuss impact on the long-term financial plan. I thought that potentially could be considered for that section. Noting on page 22 where we were talking about late items, it still does refer to supplementary items. And just raising with council members, page 26 deals with gifts, and under the new gift procedures, the limit is $300, whereas we did have an imposed level of $50. So might just flag during the week whether we would like to discuss having a different standard at the City of Vincent to the $300 declaration standard that the state government has deemed appropriate. And just in comment in relation to the workshops, I thought that my perception of workshops and what the good structure at the workshops is for discussion is progress against the corporate business plan and KPIs, policy, early engagement on policy development and review, emerging issues, and items for community engagement. I think that probably really describes what's happening at workshops best.
Through Merkel, we can make those amendments to the draft framework.
If you agree, otherwise I could consider putting forward an amendment just to cover that section. So I'll come back to you on gifts, council members. Any other questions on the governance framework? Okay. Next item is the 8.6, adoption of the long-term financial plan 2020-21 to 2029-30. Any questions? Okay. And oh, you do? Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, this is just about, I think it was the current ratio, and just to request some clarification. From my reading of the document, I understand that that ratio is designed to assess our ability to access, cash or funds that are unrestricted, and that that the majority of our funds are in restricted reserves. I recall somewhere in the back of my mind that we may have done a review of reserves in recent years, and I wasn't sure if it actually dealt with that or forged a plan to address that, and whether there is any actions proposed or thoughts from administration on how that is to be addressed in the life of the long-term financial plan.
Apologies to interrupt. I have need to leave the meeting.
Thanks, Councillor Loden.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we've got the Manager of Strategic Projects on the Zoom, and we can provide some background on the use of the reserves in relation to the unrestricted aspect and the implications for our approach to the current ratio in this report.
Good evening and welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. So through you, in respect to that question, so strictly the ratio does not take into account restricted reserves, albeit that the restriction, the purpose of some of our reserves are quite open, and therefore that's why in some ways the commentary in the long-term financial plan highlighted how does the ratio look if we are very specific in line with the department's requirements, and that is that you do not include your restricted reserves, and what would we look like if you did include your restricted reserves. So strictly in accordance with the department's requirements, our ratio is lower than we would like, and so therefore there is the opportunity for us to look at perhaps some of our provisioning that is held in an unrestricted situation in the bank. We could be looking at that in the future, and that's one of the strategies that the director of the manager of finance and director would, I'm sure, be looking at in the longer term, and has been highlighted that we could look at that mix to improve that particular ratio, but it is not covered at the moment in the LTFP.
Sorry to interrupt just now. I'll return to the meeting.
Sorry, Councillor Loden.
I was just saying that I'd return to the meeting so it could be noted.
Thank you.
I think I've had the answer to my question. So,
Okay, finished?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question on the long-term financial plan? Okay, thank you. Who's not on mute?
Through you, Mayor Cole.
I think everyone's on mute now.
No, we do now.
Yep, all good. Thank you. 8.7, the information bulletin. Councillor Hallett.
Sorry, can I just be reminded as to how frequently we get the register of trees that have been replaced and when the next one will be due?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, from recollection, it's quarterly, but I'd have to check when the next one's due.
Any other questions on the information bulletin? No, okay. So that concludes the items, other than going back to item 6.2. Councillor Loden wanted to ask some questions about the confidential attachments to that item. So we will have to go behind closed doors and just suspend the live stream just for that part. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.